Hello. It strikes me if you're going to do book reviews or review books, you might wish to, read the book and you'll see why I'm scrolling through this book on the screen here. And you'll see why when we get to the back front of this book. Now, this particular book is called Carved in Stone and it's about the Picts, who are a group of people who, to be honest, there's only a certain amount known about really, and they pop up in fantasy and fiction. Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan, was infamous for using them, and he deployed them in odd ways. He deployed them as both genetically inferior and genetically equal. He had them fighting Conan and shown as genetic sort of oddities and unequal to Conan. But you also had him use them later on with his hero Bran McMorn as roughly equal to the cultures around them, although still with a taint of sort of contempt that he seemed to have for them. But leaving him aside, this particular book here has caused some controversy because I've run across some strange reviews of it where it's going on about how it's populated by a slew of black people and suggests that Pickland, or what might become modern Scotland, was populated by mainly black people. Well, frankly, that's nonsense. And it shows why you shouldn't review books by picking one image. And it also shows why you shouldn't trust reviewers doing that and why it's a dishonest narrative to do so. And I've rolled all the way back to the front of this book after having read all of it on its PDF version. And we're going to go through it from the beginning. And you might have noticed some of it as we went through. Now, it starts with the author using a line image from the famous Pictish sort of stone engravings, which are commonly found around parts of modern Scotland, or as it was then, Pickland. I've always thought this one looks remarkably like a modern poodle myself, but there you go. And it goes on about who are the Picts to start with. Well, there you go. That's an image replete with Afro-Caribbeans, isn't it, wandering about? I can just see the sort of, Afro-Caribbean ambience off that picture. Who are the Picts? And it gives you a basic history of them, about their oral traditions, how the culture evolved, as much as we know, since it's an oral tradition, and there's a great deal of debate about how it didn't or didn't evolve and what it actually involved. And it ends with the comments, the civilization didn't really end, it merged and grew. From the 8th century, the Viking Age began across Britain, and the influx of seaborne foes forced the Picts to become allies with their neighbours, the Celts of Dalriada. Now, before I start this is going to be quite a lengthy video because I'm going to go through this book bit by bit by bit, because this kind of dishonest narrative of stealing one image out of a book and trying to review a book on one image, well, it's frankly intellectually void. It robs the whole purpose of reviewing of intellectual veracity, and it's been done to push an agenda. Let's be perfectly frank about that. It's been done to push an agenda, and a particularly unpleasant agenda, by some of the channels that I've run across reviews of this book on. Before I go on, one, this book was really written as a source guide by the publisher Stout Stoke for stuff like role-playing games, although it can also be viewed as a history book. But it is not, as one channel tried to present it, as a serious academic tome, although it is written by people with academic credentials. It's not aimed at sort of people aiming to turn out a thesis from it or that kind of level of work. It is well written and it could be used to teach junior level history, but its purpose is not to be a serious academic tome. Its purpose is to be a source book for people aiming to create games or story settings within the world of Pickland or early modern Scotland. And we're going to keep going through it because I'm fed up with this kind of nonsense of suggesting that one or two pictures of black people somehow suggests that the work is suggesting that the whole of Pickland, or early modern Scotland, if you will, you could probably use them somewhat interchangeably, although that could be argued, was overrun by Afro-Caribbeans, or people as, and I use this term with derision because it's currently being used by race realists, sub-Saharans. That term is currently being used by people who don't like to use the N-word because they know they'd get their asses kicked off YouTube instantly. So they've started using that term instead. And you know who you are. So we start with what is archaeology. the kind of thing you'd have in a book for a bright teen if you're presenting this sort of stuff. Yeah, no black people there. Oh, look, we've got one person who may be mixed race. She might be Asian. She might be light skinned Caribbean, but she's a modern archaeologist. So we can count her out of the picture because she's a modern archaeologist and therefore not a Pict. And we've got a tour guide down the bottom and three white kids. We can count that one out straight away. Then we have some information about what do we know about the Picts, limited evidence, written sources, knowledge gaps, and adjacent cultures. The infamous pictures of shoes and bits of old jewelry that you find in all history books, they always pop up. And a bit about why should we play or why should you make a world setting for this kind of setting if you're doing role playing. A picture of an engraved bit of Pictish engraving on stones. And then we have this picture. Now, this particular picture could have stepped right out of the Gaelic revival of the late 1800s or early 20th century. If you hadn't told me it was in this book, I would have thought it would have come from something like that and was a picture illustrating one of the Fenian or Red Branch hero myth cycles or something, because it would have fit nicely into those worlds. It's, again, notable for its lack of black people running about in there. Now, there are a few pictures of black people in this book, but there are reasons why they're there. And the dishonest reviewers who have tried to touch this book and not present the reasons they're there show their own lack of knowledge, and they also show they probably haven't read the book. Landscapes. Again, some of this engraving, the authors of the book are using it as a running theme. And there's some Afro-Caribbean. Oh no, hang on, they're just birds sitting on a crag. Some landscapes. Oh look, that must be an Afro-Caribbean landscape, and that must be an Asian one, and that must be I don't know, a Pakistani one, and then there's an Irish one. Oh no, hang on, they're just actually landscapes. A mountain, a lynx, a lox, some salmons, stereotypical island animal or fish that's emblematic of Scottish and to an extent Irish culture. Talks about bear cubs, which are of course now extinct in modern Scotland, and a water vole. And it just gives people ideas about how they might use them in the setting. And we're going to keep skipping forward until we get people. It's geese, coastline, a squid, weather, more weather, more weather. In Scotland, there's going to be lots of rain in there if you're doing a setting. Kingdoms, Dalriatha, Northumbria, the biggest kingdom of all in that era, to the down below them. Some of the Hebrides, Ireland over there, Cairngorms, blah, blah. Where to find people, estimates of how many people you put in these kingdoms if you're making such a setting, and how you might create rumor and gossip for such a setting. But still, no, those are cartoony people, so let's find some real people. No. Oh, look, oh no, still no more black people. And we're at page 48. Determining value, because obviously if you create a setting like that and you have characters in it, they need some way to trade for the game to work. You might argue the gent they're sitting is another race. You might not. It's debatable. I'll leave it up in the air. It might be just viewed as a colorist view interpretation. Now, here at page 52, we find someone who's identified as the local bishop. Now, that's not as problematic as you think. The local bishop is colored with another skin tone. The local bishops of the early Middle Ages in Pictland or Ireland or early medieval Scotland didn't always come from those areas. Some of them came from outside those areas, especially early on in the world of Christianity when missionary activities were first occurring. And some of them came as far away from Anatolia or bits of what was the former Roman Empire or was still the Eastern Roman Empire. So there's no guarantee they'd always have exactly the same skin tone as the locals. So in 52 pages, we've uncovered one image. Wow. That may or may, that isn't all that troubling. Okay. Past that. Some people in an image for where somebody wanted to create images of possible turmoil in the land for a game setting as suggestions of how you could do it. And we're on and on. And on page 60, we have an old granny who absolutely Afro-Caribbean that old granny looks, doesn't she? Oh, no, hang on, she doesn't. I'm wrong. With a toddler where she's playing with him or teaching him. Bit about Ogham. Then we're past, as I say, these images, some of those images you didn't tell me in isolation, I would have assumed they were possibly something from the Gaelic revival or something from early in the 20th century. They're drawn in a particular style that would lead me to that conclusion. Bit about magic and miracles. And here we have on age 70 some monks in a monastery. And as the text points out, monks in monasteries could come from all sorts of places. And indeed they could. You'll find lots of references to that in medieval texts about monks from various lands living together. So if that's all what we're going on about, this and there's one other image on the next page and two or three others, this is really very much a tempest in a very big teacup. And it's a tempest that big that's been exaggerated into a tornado. Here we have, and this image has been used by at least 2 to 3 channels I've encountered, going on about this image of a black bloke and what looks like possibly could be another black bloke or Asian bloke in the background. What it does fails to notice, and that they've all done, is they've all chopped off the bottom of the bottom where it says the flow of faith. Church documentation shows that Christianity caused many people to cross political and geographical borders to spread their faith. And, for example, St. Columba crossed from Ireland to modern-day Scotland. And, of course, at this point, somebody who objects to this presentation, we're going, yeah, but the Scots and Irish look quite similar. We do, and we share quite a lot of genetic history and lineage. But there are saints that wandered into Scotland and Ireland from very far afield. And we'll get to that in a few more pages. Venerated saints, Columba, one of the biggest Irish saints at this point. I'll stop because my voice is getting a bit hoarse. Take up a mouthful of cocoa. That lovely drink, cocoa. You can't get a refill of it, apparently, in Wetherspoons anymore. And we have St. Traduna. And why is St. Traduna drawn as darker skinned than everyone else, you might ask? Well, there's a very good reason for St. Traduna. Traditionally is supposed to have come from Anatolia. And it's the subject of a rather gruesome legend where a local king kept trying to push his attentions on him and remark on her beautiful eyes. And eventually, St. Traduna pulled out her eyes and sent them to him and said, oh, since he liked them so much, he could have them. It's rather a gruesome legend. There's quite a few gruesome legends like that in Christianity, some of which are like a bit stomach churning, although they can be amusing, and sometimes they're symbolic and need to be understood that way. And what might seem gruesome isn't quite so much when you dig underneath it. But there's a few other saints I couldn't mention if I was in the mood, such as Saint Cerf, who is supposed to have been Arabic, although that's debatable, and personally I think that's most unlikely. And part 5, Lives. And we're now at page 76. And I'm failing to notice this endless profusion of black people that's supposed to be in this book. I see a few people here and there with slightly swarthy complexions or so forth, but I don't really see this overkill of endless black people or Afro-Caribbeans or so forth that are supposed to have invaded this book. We've now reached page 80. Ancient monuments, Brock's, wonders, people you'll meet, where the writer gives you some idea about characters you could set up for situations for a role-playing game to give the world more veracity. Let's read out a few. A pair of Byzantine monks, 3 lecturers and a Northumbrian soldier, 5 Gaels carrying their boat overland, 2 charcoal burners. Real medieval kind of archetypical figures. And we have 2 black people on this page. But when you look at the top, international travel is well documented in Pictland. There are accounts of African soldiers manning Hadrian's walls. And we're going to get the traditional, they were from North Africa and were blah, 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 one at this. They may have been, they may not have been. and Western Asian soldiers and Syrians stationed along the Antonine Wall. There are artifacts from before, during, and after our time period, e.g., the time period the book is interested in. They originate from Northern Africa, Middle East, and even as far as Eurasia and Sub-Saharan Africa. A term that, unfortunately for the creators of this book, as I say, has been borrowed and mutated in a way that's quite unpleasant. It will soon become hard to use, I think. Settlements. Generating settlements. A big thing in a role-playing game. You want somewhere for the characters to live or a world if you're playing it as a long-running game. Hearth and home. A list of people you might put in an imaginary village. Oh, notice the lack of Afro-Caribbean people there. Abernathy. Oh, here we have Osric the Wildcat Whisperer. His farmstead borders the northern woods, so the trip into town can take a few hours. When he leaves, he ties his house key around the neck of a wildcat that lives in his rafters. Why does Osric like cocoa? Abernathy Monastery. Page 93, Clatchard Craig. I'll just keep skipping because these are all just backdrops that you might create if you were running the game. But you'll notice as I scroll, if you look at the pictures, again, where's all these slew of endless black people that's supposed to be in this book? So far, we've had about 2 or 3 images, and I'm on page 103. One more, could be possibly a trader or something, or a visitor. So 4 out of hundreds of images. I'll scroll that bit. Scroll that bit. Blacksmithing, obviously, I'll scroll that. Past that. And we've got 1 or 2 more. So out of this entire book, and I've got 2 guys who could be regarded, since it talks about trade goods, as possibly traders again. So in a book of 144 pages, since this last section tends to go on about artwork and especially stone carving and stuff like that, we have about 5 or 6 images out of hundreds. Oh, and 1 more. It's hardly overkill, and it's hardly suggesting that the whole of Pickland was populated by mainly Afro-Caribbean people, or, as a somewhat lunatic put it in one review, by fat transsexuals. Absolute nonsense. It would be a good idea if people reading these books, actually, and reviewing them, actually let you see inside the book to some degree, instead of presenting one image, pulling it out and going, it's another wokey book, black people are taking over everywhere, etc., in a Daily Mail-esque style, designed to just rile people up and pee them off. Now, the rest of this book is appendices, but for the sake of honesty, I'll scroll to the end on it, so we can see what's in there. As you can see, it's just text, so there's no imagery. And it's just like the notes of what was used and a bibliography and a glossary down the end. But as I say, for the sake of honesty, we'll go right to the end. And there we are at the end, page 155, and the back cover. Now, it strikes me, if you're going to take an image of one image out of a book like that and repurpose it to suggest stuff, you may have an agenda that's rather unpleasant. And you may have an agenda beyond just reviewing a book. And reviewing a book requires you, as I said at the end, and we'll come round in a circle, like the worm eating its tail, to actually read the book. Not just pull an image out of it to create fear and to serve as low-grade propaganda. But that seems to have a lovely market segment, as it always did. And it seems to be a big ready cash earner for some people. I'll leave it there. If you want to read the book, you can make up your own minds, of course.